Welcome to another movie plot and enjoy the memories. We begin in an alternate dimension called the New World with a sandship traversing the desert. It's sailing to a sky tower in the distance and is captained by the hardened Admiral who studies his books on the ancient structure. He transports a dozen or so monster hunters in the hull of his ship, one of whom sits around carving two small figurines. The handler keeps watch when suddenly a pair of horned wyverns called Diablos emerge from the sand and strike the side of the ship. In the chaos, the hunter saves the handler from the jaws of the monster only to be knocked from the ship by a barrel himself and abandoned on the surface. Meanwhile on our world, a small team of UN soldiers respond to a distress call from Bravo team in an Afghan desert. Team Alpha's Lieutenant Natalie Artemis leads them into the middle of nowhere and past markers that are still a mystery to Earth. They connect with Lincoln at the missing team's location only to observe their tire tracks suddenly just stop. A massive electrical sandstorm appears over the horizon, so Alpha team attempts to retreat back the way they came. One soldier Marshall ties his dog tags to his shoelaces just in case his head gets blown off by Charlie. Lightning strikes the markers, causing the etched-in runes to begin to glow as a dimensional gate opens up around the team. They begin to get flushed with images of the tower when a cliff appears in the middle of the road and the vehicles tumble off the edge. They come to a halt in a completely different desert with no sign of the storm and the dark tower ominously sitting on the horizon. As their driver Steeler gets their patrol vehicle working and dash their Humvee, they locate the wreckages of Bravo's vehicles along with the charred remains of the soldiers. They've been burned by a fire so hot that it scorched the sand around them into glass, and Axe notes their excessive use of ammunition amounted to 0 confirmed kills. They decide to begin searching the desert and are spotted by the hunter from an island of rocks that he's been exiled. Alpha team are suddenly stopped in their tracks and are stunned at the enormous skeleton of a monster that they presume to be the remains of a dinosaur. The hunter gets into range to fire a warning arrow at one of the ribs, alerting them to quit making noise, but they interpret it as an attack and open fire on the helpful stranger. Artemis orders them to stand down when realizing that it's only chalk, but it's too late and a submerged Diablos begins chasing them through the desert. The team race towards the hunter's outcrop when the giant beast emerges unfazed by the soldiers' weapons and flips the patrol vehicle. The Humvee pulls over to help, but Axe gets killed by the monster while Steeler barely gets back to the rest of his team alive. They almost reach the rocks, but the Hummer's nailed as well and Steeler impaled by the Diablos as he emerges. The creature picks him up above its head, so Steeler with his last bit of life pulls a pin and drops his grenade belt, barely missing the monster's mouth. The Black Diablo survives the explosion and chases the Team Alpha survivors the final stretch of the desert, and would catch them if it weren't for the hunter landing an explosive arrow that's little more than a distraction. It allows Artemis, Link, Marshall and Dash to get inside a cave and open fire on the monster from cover, breaking off the horn that it killed Steeler with and forcing the creature to retreat back into the sand at sundown. Before Alpha team can even calm down, Artemis is jabbed in the back by the stinger of a Nerskyla that Link shoots in the eye to release her. The lieutenant's paralyzed, so as the entire Nerskyla swarm attack the intruders, they're forced to leave Artemis behind. The hunter continues to fire arrows in support but is chased back inside his hideout where he's safe behind his defensive traps. A large Nerskyla kills Marshall while the final two flee and Artemis wakes up cocooned inside the creature's massive underground nest. She finds Dash was captured and has already died, along with confirming Marshall's death by the dog tags tied to his shoes. She comes across Link, who's able to walk initially, until the eggs laid inside him begin to hatch and he's grabbed by a Nerskyla and torn to pieces. Artemis uses an oxygen can and her flare as a makeshift flamethrower to set the monsters on fire and escape, but a burning Nerskyla grabs her just as she reaches the surface. It pulls her back, but Artemis drops a handful of bullets into the fire on its head, causing them to go off. The monsters are unwilling to follow her into the sunlight, so Artemis recovers for a moment and uses her wedding ring to find the strength to continue. She uses gunpowder to cauterize a wound and climbs the mountain to find no sign of the hunter but a cairn left by him. To check the ocean below her, Artemis tosses a rock onto the sand where the Diablos resurfaces the moment it senses vibration. It doesn't see the lieutenant and descends back into the sand where it remains hidden until she attempts to leave. Artemis goes wandering around until she comes upon a sand ship graveyard where the hunter takes her prisoner. They have a fierce knife fight where Artemis sticks the hunter in the shoulder with her blade, but he ultimately knocks her unconscious. He then binds her wrists and takes her back to his hideout before the sun sets and the Nerskyla break out through their mouths. During the night, the hunter heals his wounds, prays to his figurines and drinks water, but offers Artemis nothing. The next morning he goes to check on the proximity of the Diablos, but returns to find Artemis has escaped and she captures him, turning the tables. She goes to drink some water, but the hunter kicks it over in spite, so Artemis knocks over the figurines, causing the enraged hunter to continue fighting despite his restraints, and the two return to beating the crap out of each other. When the hunter tries to make it to his weapon, Artemis tackles him down the hill and into one of the Nerskyla mounds. He gets stuck inside with the hungry creatures gathering beneath him until Artemis decides to rescue him before he falls. She cuts his bindings and gives the nervous hunter chocolate as a peace offering, while the satisfied stranger gives her water in return. Needing to reach a rocket launcher on the Humvee to defeat the Diablos, the hunter suggests using Nerskyla venom to weaken it as the first part of their plan. They set a trap, and at sundown Artemis uses herself as bait to lure the first rising monster into a snare. With the beast trapped, the hunter then leaps from above with his greatsword and lands the killing blow before slicing off the Nerskyla stinger. They retreat back to the hideout with their prize while being pursued by the rest of them, who attempt to break their way in through the roof while the pair wait it out. Unable to speak each other's language, the hunter conveys that the figures represent his family who were killed by a nearly unbeatable monster called the Rathalos. In the morning, the hunter crafts an arrow out of the Nerskyla stinger and equips Artemis with armor and dual blades from the graveyard. He trains her to generate fire when touching the swords together and use a wrist-mounted bow called a slinger to attach herself to monsters. They enact their plan to reach the Humvee by launching a barrel from one of the ships into the desert. It distracts the Black Diablos, allowing the pair to make it halfway, before the hunter acts as bait to allow Artemis to make it the rest of the way and reach the rocket launcher. The hunter fires the poison arrow into the monster's eye, but he's knocked to the ground by Diablo's clubbed tail as it writhes around in pain. To save him, Artemis gets its attention with a minigun before landing a direct hit with a rocket when the monster charges, but it survives and flips the vehicle with her inside. Before it can kill her, the hunter climbs onto its back and plunges his sword into Diablo's head, but is knocked unconscious before finishing the job. Artemis then uses the slinger to grapple onto Black Diablo's head and drives the blade even deeper into the monster's brain. It collapses to the ground defeated, and Artemis uses one of the monster's scales as a sled to drag the sleeping hunter towards the tower in the distance. When a sandstorm hits, Artemis sets up a tent and uses a medkit from the Humvee to patch up the hunter. The next morning she excavates themselves, and the hunter's now fully recovered and is able to walk again. They continue towards the tower until reaching an oasis where a herd of neutral ankylosaur lookalikes called Apsaros drink from a river. When the thirsty Artemis goes to join them, a Cephalos leaps out at her, but the hunter beheads it, as he was using her for bait to catch their next meal, where they discuss the potential of Artemis returning home when she reaches the tower. That night the fire-breathing Rathalos begins a fire in the oasis, which causes the Apsaros to stampede through the campsite. The Admiral appears and uses his empowered switch axe to divert the herd around Artemis, who joins him with her flaming swords. The hunter gets cornered on a cliff but saved by the rookie hunter Lee, who slings through and is in turn rescued by Aiden, who slings them both to safety. Artemis thanks the Admiral, but he knocks her out and throws her in the ship's brig until he can be sure he trusts her. When alone, she escapes by breaking the lock to a trapdoor and drops into the kitchen, only to be startled by the ship's cook Palico. He cooks up a storm while the hunter vouches for Artemis, who's able to meet with the Admiral. He learned English from others who came to the New World before them and confirms her suspicions that the Sky Tower is connected to her arrival, and was built by an ancient civilization that would traverse between both until it destroyed them. He says that they must defeat the greater Rathalos that guards the Sky Tower if they're to send Artemis home, but must traverse the remaining distance on foot as the sandship was damaged during the first Diablos attack. The next morning the hunters set off on their long journey and arrive by nightfall, where marker stones matching the ones on Earth create spontaneous portals around the obsidian-covered base. They spread out to draw on the Rathalos, and the Admiral informs Artemis that the monster is most vulnerable just before it breathes fire. Before they even see what hit them, the monster torches two hunters and lands to quickly incapacitate Lee and Aiden. As it corners the hunter and Artemis, the Admiral saves them using his switch axe to counter the monster's fire with fire. Artemis joins in with her blade, slicing at the Rathalos' wing and jabbing it in the face, while the hunter fires explosive arrows from the sideline. Before the creature can land an incinerating blow on Artemis, she leaps from the cliff through a portal that returns her to Earth. She wakes up expecting to see the wings of a dragon, but gets located by a military osprey and rescued by the third team sent into the area to investigate. Confused by the armor that she's wearing, they airlift her back to civilization when a portal opens and the greater Rathalos flies straight into our world, biting off the cockpit of the osprey and sending it crashing to the ground. The monster makes short work of the military, destroying all of the Humvees in a single breath, then turns its attention to the tanks, ripping off the turrets and eating the men from the buckets like popcorn. When more heavily armed air support arrives, it easily deals with them as well, while Artemis spends this time re-equipping her gear and finding her weapons. When the greater Rathalos destroys the command plane overseeing the operation, Artemis emerges from the crash to be knocked back by the falling wreckage as she confronts the monster once again. She grapples herself onto the monster's wing and slices its entire length to the ground, but it does little more than enrage it. As it fills its mouth with fuel and readies its flame, Artemis launches an explosive from the slinger into the monster's throat, landing the most crippling shot it's felt as the creature falls motionless. Artemis rises to gloat, but the Rathalos regains its feet and lunges at the helpless lieutenant, but is knocked back by the hunter's arrow, who's crossed over to help. He locates an opening in the Rathalos' neck caused by Artemis and lands a triple shot, exploding the monster and finally avenging his family. Before they can celebrate their victory, the Admiral crosses over and tosses Artemis a sword as the portal storm begins to reform around the Sky Tower. A new creature emerges called the Gore Magala as the team charge, and the hunter now uses an insect glaive to launch himself at the monster. And the movie ends.